Hello, first video. I've been meaning to do a podcast like this for so long. I've always loved watching them. I can talk about knitting forever and ever, and I just finally thought, you know what, I've got a couple of days, I'm gonna get on with it. I'm gonna finally film my first podcast and ramble about I don't really know what. I don't have a strict plan, but I should probably introduce myself first. I already have quite a few tutorial videos on this channel. Some complete learn to knit beginner basics kind of things, and a few more, not advanced techniques I wouldn't say yet, we haven't gone quite that far, but a few more useful techniques for once for other knitters, and I really want to expand that, but I also want to just do chatty, rambly videos too. I guess at the minute, on lockdown number 3, in quarantine. Do we even call it quarantine anymore? Is it just daily life? Whatever, you know what I mean. Round 3 in England in January, when it's pretty grim and rainy and I've not left the house in days because it's not even nice to go for a walk, and it's just nice to actually talk. I know there's a few Zoom knit nights and stuff coming up that I'm looking forward to, but I figured in the meantime I might as well just talk to a camera. I'm lucky enough that I live with my mum, who's also a knitter, so I talk to her a lot about stuff, but I feel like we've probably covered every single topic under the sun. So yeah, I just thought I'd come on for a ramble, and should start by introducing myself anyway. So I'm Lily. I'm Lily Kate Makes on Instagram. Imaginative, I know. Lily Kate is my first name and my middle name. I quite get asked about that quite a lot actually, or people say hi Kate and I'm like, it's not my name, it's just my middle name. So yeah, that's my Instagram page where I share all my designs, things that I've made, occasionally things that I've crocheted or sewn, but not very often. Just generally knitting, that's kind of my thing. As you can tell by my little jumper here, this is probably my all-time favourite. I don't know if you can see it very well there. I'll just stand up, show you. That's my Lithium Sweater. It's one of my most popular patterns, it's one of my favourite patterns. I just love it, it's so classic and fun. But anyway, I'm supposed to be introducing myself. So I'm 23 years old, and I have been knitting and designing, well, knitting since I was 8, designing since I was 11 or 12, so I'm a bit of an old timer really. I've been doing this for quite a while, not new on the scene anymore. I'm an old one. So yeah, I've been designing for quite a while, got really into it as a young teenager, had my first patterns published in magazines and books when I was just about to turn 13. Yeah, I had some great contacts with people that I just happened to meet, editors of magazines and things like that, at events, which was just really lucky, and I'm still in contact with those people today. So it gave me some great opportunities when I was really young. I also self-published my patterns on Ravelry back in the day. My Ravelry projects and design library is like, it's like a trip down memory lane looking through that. Some of it's a bit cringy looking at, you know, your 13-year-old self is always going to have an element of cringe about them, isn't there? But hey ho. So yeah, I was designing when I was really young, and throughout my later teens, I feel like I've talked about this before, I have on other YouTube channels, but anyway, for the full recap, in my later teens I did GCSE and A-level textiles, which I really loved, but that kind of took me away from knitting for fun because I was doing it for more like art pieces, which, yeah, it did take me away from where I'd started, but I think it was a really good thing overall, that it pushed me to use more different mediums and use the technique of knitting in a more creative way, which was fun to have that challenge. It was a challenge because we weren't encouraged to do any knitting because obviously it was such a slow process, but I was determined. So I managed to get knitting into pretty much every project that I did. Got an A star, so it's fine. Yeah, so that took me until I was about 18, and then over the next couple of years I just knit a few items myself. I was still designing them but not writing up the patterns. This was kind of after I'd stopped using Ravelry but before I started my knitting Instagram account. So at this point I'd post a few photos every now and then on my personal account. No one really cared about knitting on there because why would they? I was doing more modelling and blogging and that kind of thing at the time, which was great. And then in 2019 I had a bit of a light bulb moment of thinking, well, if I was doing this when I was really young, I still enjoy making and knitting and doing all the maths of it and producing the finished item. I still enjoy doing that, but I've just been doing it personally, just for myself. Thought, why am I not making a bigger deal of this? Why am I not like sharing it with people who actually care about stitches and yarn and stuff? So I started my separate Instagram account, and that was I think that was April 2019, so coming up 2 years ago, and since then it's just been so nice to connect with other people around the world who get it, who share the same enthusiasm that I do for knitting and crochet and whatever, mainly knitting. So yeah, that's just been really nice to do over the last couple of years. I'm so glad that I did, because 2019 me didn't know that a pandemic was around the corner and that knitting and sharing it on the internet would become pretty much a lifeline. That's like the main thing that I do these days, because everything else fell off a cliff. Well, I say it fell off a cliff. I kind of chose to do my pivot before the pandemic actually came around, and then it just worked out quite luckily in my favour. What point was I trying to make there? Oh yeah, so sharing things with other knitters online who get it. Because like, as a young knitter, as a knitter in where I live in general, I don't know very many other people around here that also are crafty. Occasionally I come across someone, I'm like, hi, I see you knitting, and I run over and say hello. I'm not actually exaggerating there, I do. See me in Piccadilly Station once, I saw an old woman knitting, I was like, hi! What are you making? Oh, I love knitting and all this. I was really enthusiastic, trying to get chatting. Completely blanked me. I don't know if she believed me when I said that I was actually interested, if she just thought I was taking the mick, but whatever. Yeah, point being, I don't know that many knitters in real life. I do know a few, and I taught my first workshop last year, just before the old Rona came around, in March. And that was great to teach people to knit, and I said, oh, it'd be great to have a little local knitting group. Okay, obviously that never happened. But yeah, young knitters, we are out there. I feel like silly saying you're a young knitter because I've been doing it so long now. But I just thought it'd be nice to share stuff on YouTube too, where I can ramble. As you can tell, that's kind of how I operate. So I thought maybe I could share might as well share what I'm working on in a minute, although I do kind of like to keep showing the actual item until it's actually finished. Partly because I've had, over the years ago and recently, some issues with people ripping me off. Not going to go into that rant today, but I just like to keep it until it's finished, and then I'll show the work in progress shots like after. So I'll only show a little bit today. I'm working on another pink one. It's fluffy. It's given me a bit of a headache at parts. It had to be ripped back a couple of times. I'm using this giant cone of yarn that I bought at Yarndale Festival a couple of years ago. Remember knitting festivals when we could go and speak to people and squish all the yarn? They're like the least social distancing friendly events ever, but I really hope they do come back. 2022 it's probably going to be, isn't it? Anyway, I'll stop whinging. But I'm using a white cotton acrylic blend, DK, held together with this, it says kid something, super kid. It's some sort of mohair, but I don't know exactly what or exactly how much, but it's super fine. Probably can't even see it if I hold it there. Maybe there. Super fine, super fluffy, and knits up really nicely, held with this white, so I'm working on that right now. Just moved a little there because the sun has come out for the first time all week. So hopefully this lighting will be okay. Anyway, moving on from what I currently have on my needles, which I'm quite good at the moment about it being a monogamous knitter. I used to get quite distracted and get the classic startitis, wanting to cast on a project before another one's finished, but now that I've really got my head around treating it as a business, I'm like, right, work on one design, write it up, work on another design, write it up, rather than this kind of flitting back and forth between different patterns and different projects. Found when I tried doing that, I tried working on 3 at once, thinking I would release them all at the same time. It just ended up that they all took much longer, so one at a time. But I do have a big queue of projects that are going to be coming next, but I will not start them yet. So my next pattern that will actually be out though So the last project that I finished is my any day vest. I'll have to sit back a bit to show you. So this is, it's a little bit creased there because they always get creased when you have to keep them stored, piled up and folded in a cupboard, but I figured that's better than having them hanging and all stretched out of shape. So yes, any day vest. This is, it kind of started from my any day sweater, which I should probably have got out, but I'll link it down below, which was my first design when I came back to designing a couple of years ago. And just like a cropped, oversized, big sleeved, chunky weight sweater that is worked inside out. That's kind of one of my favourite techniques actually. It's not really a technique, working things inside out. And I was wearing it in December sometime and just thought, why don't I just do a vest with this? Because I had this yarn to play with that Lovecraft sent to me. It is called Debbie Bliss Merrian. I should probably stand up. You can kind of see the length it sits there. The fit, it's got a little bit of ease. Yeah. So I had this Merrian yarn, which is a merino acrylic blend. So it's it feels very durable actually. I tried snapping it and I can usually snap any yarn. I'm like quite like the Hulk, as my brother said, with the yarn, or I like to think I am. This one I could not snap. It was very, very strong. Anyway, so yeah, I just thought it was a perfect match. And I had the idea when I had that yarn, thought, bam, sorted. Crack on, knit it in about 3 days. It isn't just the any day sweater with the sleeves chopped off. It does have, it basically starts the same at the waist and then changes from everything else from there changes. It has a slip stitch detail that runs all the way up the front and all the way up the back. It's worked inside out, and you can probably see there are faux seams, another of my favourite techniques. Faux seam around here, faux seams all around the armholes, on the top of the shoulder if I hold it like that, a little tiny faux seam there, and all around the neck. Which, if you do it neatly enough, if you pick up your stitches neatly enough and weave in your ends neatly enough, mean it is a completely reversible garment. So that's the inside, but I think you could definitely wear that. Not that I ever do because I prefer the other side, but no reason why you couldn't. So that pattern is currently being tested, which some people have finished, some people are still working on it. We're just figuring out things like the sizing that I find that's really helpful with test knitters, that sometimes it's just about, oh, there's a missing knit one here or something like that. And sometimes it's more things, like we found that when you work this in the much bigger sizes, the weight of the fabric is obviously much heavier, and that makes it behave in a slightly different way. So I think I might tweak it so that the larger sizes have 0 ease and the smaller sizes have 2 to 4 inches of ease, which seems a bit like a strange thing to do, but that's one thing I've learned through the test knitting process, is that obviously I already knew that you can't just take a blanket approach across all the sizes, but things like the ease, sometimes you have to have proportional ease, so that on my size it has 4 inches, and on a bust of 56 say, it has 6 to 7 inches of ease, so that you get the similar roomy look. But sometimes when you do that, that really doesn't work, because it just ends up looking like too much of an excess of fabric, and you actually have to reduce the amount of ease on the larger sizes, which I only ever do sort of in discussions with test knitters, if that turns out to actually be the way that produces a more well-fitting garment. For example, my Lithium Sweater that I just published, I should just go grab that actually, 1 second. Okay, so this Lithium Sweater that I just published, is published the right word? Released? Come on, focus. Whatever you want to call it. So it has these big sleeves in a lace pattern, and what we established through the test knitting process is that those sleeves basically need to be one size fits all, which sounds really not right. It sounds like you're being very not inclusive by just saying one size fits all. But what we established is that this sort of generous, oversized, dramatic sleeve look, sorry this is a bit awkward just holding it against my arm, but that comes from having generous cuffs, and most of the time your wrist doesn't tend, the wrist circumference here doesn't tend to vary as much between the sizes as say the bust circumference or the bicep circumference does. So this sleeve fits perfectly well as it was tried on, photos sent, and all we established through the test knitting group that this particular size of sleeve fits perfectly well on the sizes, I think 1 to 7. I can't remember off the top of my head if it was 1 to 7 or 1 to 6. And then the sizes, yeah, 1 to 6, and then the sizes 7, 8 and 9 had one extra repeat of this lace in the cuff. So they all were straight sleeves, but that's just the kind of thing that I'm hesitant to do because I feel like you want to make sure it is as inclusive as possible, and saying one size fits all sounds the absolute opposite of that. Sorry, just have a drink. But sometimes it's just the individual garment, that's how it works best. So that is one of the reasons I'm very, very grateful to test knitters for providing their feedback and just being such a great help. So, kind of deviated there, didn't I? But yeah, the Any Day sweater that's coming out next Saturday. So I think I might just tweak the ease slightly on the bigger sizes. The general fit will be, it's cropped if you want it to be. You could make it longer if you really wanted. Yeah. Oh, and it has these shaped armbands that are narrower at the bottom, wider at the top, so they just sit sort of as a little, not a cap sleeve, but just kind of slightly over your shoulder. I find the shoulder is probably what I consider the most important part of my designs. As you can tell, I like a good puff sleeve. This shoulder construction is probably my favourite. I've used it a few times now. I just think it's the real focal point of a sweater, and I don't tend to like, well, I don't dislike them, but it's not my personal style to have items that kind of just slope down the shoulder. I like a strong shoulder or a really relaxed drop sleeve, which I guess is the opposite. One or the other basically. A nice fitting shoulder or a really, really relaxed one, not a in-betweeny. On that note, my next design that is coming out, that is currently being tested as well, is the grey Stoke cardigan, which I probably should have tried this on to show you. This is super light and airy. This is a good one to show on video actually, that you can see the floofiness of it. I used 4 skeins, so this weighs less than 200 grams just, of the fibre company Ciro, which they kindly sent me as part of their yarn support programme. So I really wanted to do the yarn justice basically, and I swatched it and felt like it really needed to be in something very clean and minimal. I thought any stitch pattern, well, I mean, some people have designed patterns in this actually with textured stitches and they look great, but I wanted to just make the silhouette be the focus rather than a stitch pattern. So the fronts, this doesn't show brilliantly. Fronts are just really simple. It's a nice round neck with just garter stitch edges. So no rib or anything cinching it in. Again, the little slightly gently puffed sleeve, using my favourite seamless top down method into a pleated cuff, which is probably my favourite detail. I've used pleats a couple of times on cuffs now, and they're surprisingly simple to make, but they're so effective. You just need a couple of spare DPNs and you just rotate them, that's all. Well, you rotate one of them, that's all you need to do. And then a nice neat garter stitch cuff. Kind of liking garter stitch at the moment. I'm thinking of doing another design with a lot more of it. I think it's one of those go back to basics, and actually, you know what, the basics are where it's at sometimes. You've got to use the most simple of stitches. So yes, this one is currently being tested. I think only one person's finished it so far, so I don't have really any finished photos that I could show. This one will be out on the 20th of February, so I obviously had to give testers a bit longer for this one because it is a sport weight garment, which is something that I'm trying to be mindful of actually with, obviously I choose my projects based on what I want to knit, and I will not bother knitting anything that I don't want in my wardrobe and that I don't want to actually enjoy the process of knitting, but also I'm trying to think what patterns are going to be popular. You know, if this is my job, I need to actually think of what's going to sell. And I want to be honest about that side of things on this channel, because I feel like it's better when you can explain verbally than in a written word for these kind of things. Anyway, so yeah, I try to think about what's going to work, what's the word, commercially, and that involves actually making sure that I don't always knit in the same weight of yarn, because I find that has a massive impact on how many people are going to want to knit something. For example, 2 of my popular patterns, this one included, are in Aran weight yarn, and I think that seems to be the best happy medium, really, that it's not super chunky and heavy, because, you know, for people in warmer climates, or if people just find they're quite a warm person in general, some people just absolutely swear off chunky knits, which is completely fair enough, especially if you only get cold weather for a month or 2 a year. But also, lots of people completely swear off fine knits because they just take too long. So it's kind of, I think Aran weight seems to be the happy medium, that you can knit a sweater in, well, for me it takes about a week or 2 to knit an Aran weight sweater, maybe a bit longer sometimes. Actually no, yeah, a week or 2 for an Aran weight sweater, whereas this sport weight sweater took a month. This chunky weight vest took me 3 days, so I try to make sure I flip between all different weights, which is what I would want to do personally anyway. I don't have a fixed size that I like to work on all the time. I like to mix it up, and I find that helps. That, say for the chunky vest test knit, I only had to allow 3 to 4 weeks, and obviously if testers don't finish in that time, it is not the end of the world. I am perfectly understanding that that is not always possible, and if you don't finish, that is okay. But ideally, like, that kind of thing can be knit in a week, so that was plenty time. Whereas with this one, I have to allow a lot longer, so the whole process from start to finish, of an idea in my head to me knitting it, to them writing up the pattern, grading it, figuring out who's test knitting what size, sending the pattern to them, any to and fro as they're test knitting. The whole process for a lighter weight garment takes so much longer, like at least double the time basically. So I need to factor that into how many patterns I want to get out in a certain frame of time. So basically I'm just rambling here, but the conclusion is do a bit of everything. That's what I've established so far, and that's what I continue to do, well, what I plan to continue to do for 2021. So that would be interesting actually, if you can let me know your thoughts on that. Do you think I should keep mixing it up, or do you think I should just be like, right, stick down the middle, DK and Aran weight everything? Dunno. But anyway, that's my 2 designs that I have been working on lately. They're coming out soon. I hope you've enjoyed listening. What else was I going to ramble about? I'll save more ramblings for other episodes rather than fitting everything in here. Thinking of doing them every 2 weeks or so. At the minute, I feel like I've just rambled about myself for ages here. But yeah, it's just nice to be able to talk about knitting to people who hopefully get it. And thank you for watching.